Let's talk about a day that changed the U.S. Navy forever. April 10th, 1963, right in the thick of the Cold War. It's the day the Navy suffered a truly monumental loss, a disaster that peeled back the curtain on a hidden weakness in its most advanced tech. Today, we're diving deep into the sinking of the USS Thresher. Now, you gotta understand that USS Thresher wasn't just any submarine. This was the lead ship of a whole new class of nuclear-powered attack subs. It was the absolute pinnacle, a symbol of America's technological might. We're talking faster, deeper, and quieter than anything that had come before it. This thing was designed for one purpose, to hunt Soviet subs in the blackness of the deep ocean. It was, for all intents and purposes, invincible. And yet, during what should have been a routine deep dive test, this marvel of engineering, with 129 people on board, just vanished, gone, in less than 90 minutes. So the big question is, how does that even happen? How could a machine this advanced, this invincible, simply disappear? Okay, so let's get into it. The best way to understand this is to look at the Thresher's final moments. The entire tragedy unfolds through these incredibly tense and honestly pretty cryptic messages with its escort ship, the USS Skylark. All right, check this timeline out. At 9:02 in the morning, everything's totally normal. But just 9 minutes later, something's wrong. SOSUS, which is basically the Navy's giant underwater microphone network, detects the sub's main coolant pumps stopping. That's a huge deal. It means the nuclear reactor just performed an emergency shutdown, or scrammed. Then you get these chillingly calm voice messages. Minor difficulties, attempting to blow. A garbled message with just the words, test depth. And then, a minute and a half later, a sound is recorded that's consistent with a hull imploding. After that, just silence. I mean, let's just focus on that phrase, minor difficulties. What on earth is a minor problem when you're on the world's most advanced submarine, miles below the surface? It's just wild. This message sounds so routine, but you know that crew was fighting for their lives against something they couldn't control. Attempting to blow? That was their last resort, their Hail Mary pass to force the sub to the surface using compressed air. But for some terrifying reason, it wasn't working. So what the investigation found was that this wasn't just one thing going wrong. Nope. The loss of the Thresher, it was like a perfect storm. A horrible domino effect where one tiny failure triggered the next and the next in a cascade of disaster. So here's how it all went down, step by fatal step. It likely started with something ridiculously simple, a pipe joint failing. But this isn't a leaky faucet at home. This is a high-pressure jet of salt water spraying all over critical electrical panels. That shorts everything out, causing the reactor to scram. So now they have no power. Their only move is to blow the ballast tanks. But, and this is the killer detail, as that high-pressure air rushes through the system, it flash freezes moisture on some temporary filters that shouldn't have even been there, creating an ice plug. It's like a clot in an artery. Game over. The sub is now just a powerless, 4,000-ton piece of steel, sinking and sinking, helpless until it passes its crushed up. And this right here, this is where it all started. On the left, that's an actual piece of pipe they recovered from the wreckage on the ocean floor. On the right, an example of what one of these bad joints looks like. The entire catastrophe, all 129 lives, it all began with something this small. A single weak connection in a pipe. So what is brazing? Well, you can think of it like a kind of high-temperature soldering, used to join pipes together. But here's the scary part. The investigation found that the quality control for this process was, well, it was shockingly bad. A lot of these joints looked totally solid from the outside, but they were actually incredibly weak. It was a hidden vulnerability across the entire fleet. The Thresher wasn't just a submarine, it was a ticking time bomb. Okay, so after a disaster this huge, the fallout is obviously going to be massive. It led to a formal court of inquiry, and right at the center of it all was one of the most powerful and controversial figures in naval history, Admiral Hyman Rickover. You might know him as the father of the nuclear navy. Just let that number sink in for a second. 129. That includes all the sailors and officers, but also civilian technicians from the shipyard who were just on board for the test dive. That number, that immense human cost, is what drove the whole investigation, and you can bet it weighed on everyone, but especially on Rickover. Now, military inquiries are usually cold. They're technical, but what Rickover did was revolutionary. He didn't start his testimony with engineering data. He started with this quote about his personal grief. For a top admiral in the 1960s to speak with that kind of raw emotion, it was unheard of. He cut right through the bureaucracy and made it human. He framed this not as an equipment failure, but as a deep, personal failure of responsibility. And here's the part that's just absolutely heartbreaking. Rickover already knew. He knew these brazed joints were a massive problem. In fact, 2 whole years before the Thresher went down, he had already started a program to get them all replaced with much stronger welded joints. The Thresher was lost because time simply ran out. The fix didn't get to her fast enough. You can only imagine how that must have fueled his intense sense of responsibility. So what did Rickover do with all that guilt and responsibility? He channeled it. He poured every bit of it into a complete and total revolution in naval safety. Literally, from the ashes of this disaster rose one of the most rigorous quality assurance programs ever created, SubSafe. And the change was it was night and day. Look at this comparison. Before Thresher, you had these iffy brazed pipes and inconsistent standards. After SubSafe, every critical joint was welded, and then X-rayed to be sure. Every single piece of material was certified. The emergency surfacing system was completely redesigned from the ground up. This wasn't just a technical fix, it was a complete philosophical overhaul. And you really, really cannot overstate the impact of SubSafe. Get this, since it was implemented, there has not been a single loss of a SubSafe certified U.S. submarine. Not one. It's a painful irony, right? The 129 men on the Thresher died in a disaster that absolutely should have been prevented, but their loss directly led to a program that has, without a doubt, saved countless lives since. So you'd think that's the end of the story. A terrible tragedy, a hard lesson learned, and a legacy of safety. But it's not quite that simple. Some recently declassified documents have introduced this really haunting final chapter, a controversy based on what another submarine might have heard during the search. So here's the debate. On one side, you have the search submarine USS Seawolf, whose crew reported hearing metallic banging sounds a full day after the Thresher went down. But on the other hand, you have the hard, cold science. You've got that definitive SOS recording of a catastrophic implosion. And you've got the wreckage itself, found in pieces at a depth no hull could possibly survive. Most experts now believe the Seawolf's crew, caught in a chaotic search and desperate for any sign of hope, likely heard false positives, basically sounds from other search ships that their minds interpreted as signs of life. And that leaves us with this final, chilling question. Were the sounds the Seawolf heard just a ghost in the machine, interference in a frantic search? Or, and you have to wonder, is it possible they heard the final desperate echoes from the deep? It's that mystery that ensures the story of the USS Thresher and the 129 men lost with her will never be forgotten.